By the time I came down with polio, at first nobody knew whether I ever would walk again or not. And I remember very clearly one Monday morning, the doctors came in and said to me, "On Friday, we're going to ask you to take 3 steps." That was the first time I ever remember visualizing, looking back now. I didn't realize it then. I worked all week lying on my bed thinking of what it would be like and how I would somehow manage to take 3 steps. Friday morning came, and somehow I did manage. And that was really the start of my recovery. When I got out of the hospital, the doctors told my parents, best thing for her, since of course parents aren't going to want any of their children to play with her because they'll be afraid they'll catch polio, even though they wouldn't, but still not enough was known about it. They said, let her do whatever she's done before that she liked to do. Skating would be a good thing since that's something she did. I remember very clearly going to the rink that first time. It seemed huge after being in the hospital so long, and hanging onto the barrier and sort of creeping along it and staying down at one end. But when I found that my muscles could do some things, it made me appreciate them. And I've often wondered if maybe the reason it appealed to me so much was that I had a chance to appreciate my muscles, knowing what it was like when I couldn't use them. If you don't fall down, you aren't trying things hard enough. You aren't trying to do things that are hard enough for you. So falling down is part of learning for whatever you do, and it certainly is for skating. When I had polio, it was in the days when no one knew how to diagnose it. There wasn't any treatment except for what we called Sister Kenny treatments that were steam hot packed towels. And I had skated a little bit before then. Actually, not very much, because when I started skating, we had gas rationing and I was only allowed to go once a month. But with skating, every time I did it a little bit, I wanted to do it more. One of the most intense experiences that I had skating also occurred at the Olympics, and that was when outdoors in the middle of the championship and the finals, when I was in the middle of my program, doing the free skating with the music going in Italy, and one part of my music, which actually was Tales of Hoffmann, the Barcarolle by Offenbach, the entire audience started humming my music. And it was an overwhelming feeling of just being close to everybody, whether you knew them or not. And it really spurred me on for the last tiring minute and a half of my program. It scares me when I hear people say my daughter's going to be Olympic swimming champion someday, or when a young skater says to me, someday I want to win the world championships. It's nice to have motivation. It's important that it be motivation from within and not from a coach or friend or family. But I would bet you that most people who have succeeded, even though they had an idea of what they wanted to do, didn't just say, I want to be, and then name a title, or say happy or something like that. I bet it's because they love what they were doing. It certainly was for me. And when I was standing on the podium outdoors in the mountains with the spotlights the night when they gave out the Olympic gold medal, and I could hardly believe it, and standing there I suddenly felt as if I knew everybody in the United States. I had such a feeling of it was my country, and felt as if I had had such wonderful support from people who'd written me. And it's just a feeling that you do it because you love what you're doing, and you don't say, I want to be a certain way or a certain type. It's more a feeling from within, seeing what you can do. My grandmother said to me once, when I had told her that my English professor in high school said, why are you doing something as frivolous as a sport like skating? If you're interested in medicine, why don't you just stop doing something so silly? And I thought, well, he has a point. But at the same time, I wouldn't be any use to anybody at the age of 15 as a physician. And I mentioned it to my grandmother afterwards, and I said, it does sound silly, and it does sound as if I'm doing it just for my own fun. And she said, Tenley, you have an obligation to do the best you can with whatever you've got. And if you like to do a sport and you can do part of it well, that's a way of expressing what God gave you. And each of us needs to do that in whatever field it is. And looking back now, I think she was right, because it did make me feel, when I wanted to be in medicine, the same way. And then when I found I was interested in surgery, one of my friends said, Tenley, how can you stand to be in surgery? How can you stand the sight of blood? And I thought, well, I can't. I don't like the sight of blood any more than anybody else. But I feel I have to do something about it. And I think I was motivated to do surgery because I had some feeling inside me that maybe I could do it a little bit gentler, spare a little bit more blood loss, be conscious that explaining to a patient beforehand what it would be like afterwards might help them recover a little faster. I wanted to have an influence. I wanted to have an effect, and that motivated me to go ahead and see what I could do and try my hardest at it. I don't remember a fear about being sick. The fear I had was staying in the hospital overnight. I couldn't imagine anything worse. But no one told me how serious it was. In fact, they took the sign polio off my door because I was in isolation, hoping that I wouldn't realize how sick I was. Looking back, I don't think I ever knew how sick I was because it never occurred to me that I couldn't and wouldn't get better. I feel very fortunate when I think of the number of people in the hospital at the same time who are in iron lungs. And I do feel lucky. Because of that, perhaps I was motivated to make the most of what I could do with that luck. The fear was really wondering if my friends would play with me when I did get out and did understand what I had had. But it was just about 2 years ago that something occurred to me that hadn't until then. When I was first in the hospital that very first night, the first fear was they showed me the long needle that they were going to put in my back to do a lumbar puncture to try to make a diagnosis, but nobody told me they weren't going to put the needle all the way in, and I was scared. At the end of the bed, there was a group of maybe 6 or 7, probably looking back, house officers, interns, medical students, all in white coats. And as they were ready, they'd washed off my back and were just about to put the needle in, I said, could someone please hold my hand? I remember very clearly now that those people in their white coats looked at each other and no one came forward for a long, long time. Finally, one person came forward and let me hold his hand and squeeze it when it really hurt. It wasn't until just recently that I realized, when someone was talking about the concerns of things as serious as HIV, that nobody understood how it could be communicated or how people could catch the disease. And as long ago as that, it was very similar to some of the things going on now. As a result of that experience, where the person did come forward and hold my hand and let me squeeze it when it hurt, having the needle go in my own field of general surgery, anytime I've had to do a procedure on a patient, I've always made sure that someone, a nurse, a family member, someone held the patient's hand while I was doing a procedure, because it does help. Whatever you do, and do it the best you can, try the hardest you can, seems now to me to have a relation to whatever else you do. People have said to me, what connection does surgery have to figure skating? And then they say, I mean, aside from the fact that they're both blades. I never thought there was a connection, and I certainly didn't think of it when I first found that I wanted to be concentrating in the field of surgery. But there is somewhat a connection, because the mental preparation, trying to do your best, expecting a lot of yourself, learning to expect the unexpected. You have to be prepared, but you still don't know everything that's going to happen. Does have a relation one to the other. And actually a relationship to some of the things I'm doing now, which is working on getting some of the basic research things I've been involved in clinically applied, sort of bringing basic research to the bedside, and so physicians can use it. And in looking back, in skating, everything is stepwise. I can remember taking several pairs of skating tights to the rink because I'd get so soaked, falling down again and again and again when I tried the sit spin. And I remember my mother saying once, "Tenley, let the other children do a sit spin. Why don't you try something else?" But the feeling of when you finally do manage not to fall down when you're trying something new is such a wonderful feeling. You want that feeling again. And if you've mastered one little thing in skating, then you try the next thing. When you reach a certain level, then you're allowed to take a preliminary test, a first test, a second test. If you pass that test, you're allowed to go in the little local competition. So it's step by step by step, and it's a very good feeling to try hard and see that you've done it. And that applies to whatever you do. I remember asking my father, who's also a surgeon, "Daddy, how did you ever dare to do your first operation?" He said, "It's not a question of daring. By the time you're allowed to do it, you just are so convinced that you know how to do it so well, you're anxious to." And of course, there again, you're never allowed to do the whole cholecystectomy the first time. You're allowed to put in a skin stitch the first time, and that is quite a pleasure. One of the common threads that comes through all of the meetings when people get together for the American Academy of Achievement is creativity, dare to be different, be true to yourself, don't be so concerned with what other people think, be more concerned about what you think yourself and what you dare to do. I think I'm still like the other little girls who were skating because I just got a pair of rollerblades myself the night before last, and I felt like a beginner, was a beginner, and all those same feelings of being a beginner in figure skating came right back. It's the excitement of trying something and having some little tiny success in sort of knowing that you can do something, I think, that spurs you on. Creativity is a big part of it for me. I love the music. In skating, we have the music. You respond to the music. You forget yourself. When you're comfortable in your medium, you have a way of expressing your feelings. Then you're free to do your own choreography and make up things. I was always kind of teased for some of the silly things I'd make up in skating, but that was what I really enjoyed, making up new jumps, new spins, making up a program. I even skated to Barney the Bashful Bullfrog. And that was a challenge. I can remember saying to my grandmother, "I want to skate to this music," and she said, "What kind of a costume are you going to use for that?" I think that's what makes it. If you just, whatever you like to do, go ahead and do it and try it. Try it the hardest you can, the best you can. Even if it's seeing how big a mud puddle you can jump over. We all know that's fun. And when you're juggling things and it works, it makes you want to do it more. That's the fun of it. And all of the things we talk about, no matter how hard they are, how much work, how tough a competition, how nervous you may be, although I recommend not using the word nervous because if you say you're nervous, you are. You have to think of yourself as being like a racehorse. If a racehorse weren't keyed up for the event, the gates would open and nothing would happen. So it's important to be keyed up for something in order to do your best. But whatever it is, go ahead and do it. Don't let anybody tell you it's not important. You'll find that whatever you do the rest of your life will relate to some of those things you did, no matter how young you are or how much of a beginner you are. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning. I had discovered that there were 2 rinks in Boston where if they hadn't sold the ice for hockey for the next morning, if I'd call up after 10 o'clock at night, they'd let me use the ice and have it all to myself until the hockey game or hockey practice started. So I did that one morning. I carried my own phonograph and my skates, and it was snowing, and I unlocked the back door of the rink. Just before I did, actually, my feet slipped out from under me, flew up in the air. I fell down, all my things around me, burst out laughing and realized there wasn't a soul around. It was very, very quiet. But I had the ice all to myself that morning. Had been shown where to put the lights on. Could play the music as loud as I wanted, as many times as I wanted. And I was then working on a number that was to be for an amateur ice show that came up very soon. And it was a witch number. I decided that it would be fun to do some number where there was something big and flowing like a witch's cape, and I skated to Berlioz, and the chimes were ringing, and I had decided I would have a cauldron with dry ice and be mixing my brew. And I thought, well, what moves can I do? And gradually, as I sort of felt perfectly free, nobody watching, could do whatever I wanted, could go sliding across the ice on my rear end or trip over my own feet or anything. And I kept on doing some sort of swirly things. And I thought I wanted to do something that would take me up in the air as far as I could go and would be rather extreme. So I took off on a forward edge, jumped with my foot wide as far as I could, and then thought, but then I hadn't decided what to do. How do I land? While I was in the air, I thought, I need to land as low as I can, but not fall. So I landed on 2 feet, then tried another few times, and then finally decided that I would combine what we call a drag, which is quite an easy thing, which you may know how to do. It's going on 1 foot, bent way down with your other foot dragging on the ice behind you. So I started out the way you do an axel or an open axel, went as high as I could, and then landed as low as I could in the drag. And that I then called a witch jump, and used it in that program and had sort of fun with that. That's how the little moves get started. There's another one I call my grass skirt step, and that's simply a lot of very fast brackets very quickly in a row. And the feet move quickly, the upper body stays still, and you sort of twist in the middle. I liked to think that I was good in the compulsory figures. That wasn't the part I enjoyed. The jumps, the spins, the dance steps, the choreography, and especially that feeling of, I suppose, trying to fly was what I really like and what I still like about skating. The compulsory figures, well, there's the word, compulsory. We had to do them. If you didn't qualify or come up really high in the compulsory figures, you didn't have a chance. When the free skating came, you'd be marked too low so that you wouldn't have a chance in the free skating. But there is a kind of fascination with those school figures. There's a challenge. You're testing yourself. You're seeing how close you can come, what you can do, whether you can, in your mind's eye, draw out a pattern and create it on a totally clean, unmarked piece of ice. And sometimes when we skated outdoors in competitions in Europe, it would be on ice outdoors that might have snow on it, or sun on part of it, shadow on the other part. And that was really a challenge. You had to be sure that your body positions were right, because you can't make a circle if you can't see it, if you're not feeling it. So there was a fascination and a challenge to that. And it is a little bit like the bar exercises in ballet. I didn't work on skating to be the best woman skater in the planet. What appeals to all of us is to do something that is a challenge. I don't think we'd try if we knew it was easy. If you find something that piques your interest or that you want to try, you've already started it. why we accept a challenge, I'm not sure. Maybe it's part of that feeling of obligation to do what you can, to take part, to have compassion for feelings of other people, whether it's through expressing your own feelings or whether it's through caring for them as patients. It's being involved. It's testing yourself. I think we need to test ourselves. If you ever watch a little child, maybe 3 years old, they love to climb on things, walk on stone walls, test their balance. I still like to do that. It's within us. I think we tend to teach it out of ourselves. And it's there. I've been lucky because I've had a chance to do it in several different areas. But you have to remember that girls were not asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now, when I meet these wonderful students who have qualified to be part of the American Academy of Achievement, it's astonishing to see what so many of them have already accomplished, but also how clearly they know what areas they want to be in. There are a lot more opportunities for young women now, but they also have to make choices, and they're almost required to stick with them in a way. We had sort of a freedom. Yes, we were pioneering in a sense, but now the young women here are asked, what are you going to do? That's a different type of challenge, and they're certainly accepting it and doing it. And in fact, right now, there are a number of the students who were chosen to take part as high school students in the American Academy of Achievement who have now come back and are honorees who are explaining to this year's students what they have done since that time, and that's really exciting to see. I don't think any of us really understands the extent of what we can do, what we're capable of doing. And maybe when I was diagnosed with polio and getting through that, being one of the lucky ones who did get through it, was what changed it for me and made me appreciate things and made me realize, wow, it's amazing. We can put one foot in front of the other. We can run upstairs. Another time that occurred to me was when we studied physiology in medical school. And I can remember very clearly after our physiology class running up a whole series of stairs outside the main building at Harvard Medical School and thinking, whoops, which muscles are doing what? And I almost tripped. And again, I'm reminded that we can do more than we think we can. One place that really struck me was when I was out on the ice at a competition. My name had been called, and I was standing alone on the ice, realizing it's my turn, this is it, there's nobody else out here. Here we go. And then my music started, and as soon as my music started, I settled right down, felt like responding to the music, forgot that I should be nervous. But I also can clearly remember who was sitting, which ones of my friends were sitting in different parts of the ice. I was conscious of the surface of the ice and where there were holes, whether my music was the right speed, if my foot was in the right position for the next jump, and hundreds of things were going through my mind. And that evening afterwards, I thought, we can't just think of one thing at a time. Our brains can think of many things at once. We have to realize that. We shouldn't make ourselves ignore everything. Yes, focus, but be receptive to other things. And again, we're reminded that we can do a lot more than we think we can. And also, even though it doesn't always work, we certainly ought to try. When I learned a few things and did well in a few competitions, I found that I might be asked to show some of the other children some jumps, or sometimes an outdoor skating, or even in the indoor rinks, children would come to me and say, Tenley, will you show me how to do this or that? And that was really fun. I liked that. And also, a number of things happened that I could never have anticipated. And as soon as I started to go into some competitions and perhaps win the national junior competition, I was invited to do things like pass out the athletic awards for children, and one time it was at a reform school for girls. That was quite a moving experience for me, because I saw children younger than I was, and my own age too, who'd had terrible situations, bad luck, had really, whatever the cause, they had been in all sorts of trouble. And yet, in speaking to them absolutely normally, you could see that there was a common bond. They were just as interested in some of the things that I was. And afterwards, I was very touched when some of the people who had taken me there told me that some of the girls I had talked to had refused to speak to anybody before that. And I suddenly thought, things like sport are a common language. And I later saw that at the Olympics, when all the competitors from all over the world were there for the same purpose. You feel as if you know each other. You don't pay attention to different political backgrounds or even to language barriers. You feel as if you know each other, and there is a bond through your sport, and a very healthy bond. So things that you do that have to do with your sport can affect all other parts of your life too. It seems as if it was always I was motivated to be involved with medicine. I was fascinated, even when I was deeply involved in figure skating competition. And I just knew that what I wanted to do was be in medicine eventually. After I had been in college at Radcliffe for 3 years, I felt I really want to move on and be in medicine and get going with it. After the Olympic Championship in 1956, I applied to medical school. I remember going to the chief of neurosurgery, whom I had met, and said, are there any requirements for that you have to, any regulations, do you have to finish college before you apply to medical school? He said, well, I thought so, but I don't know, I'll check. So he checked, and he said, well, it's not written down anyplace. So I applied to medical school after 3 years. I had 7 interviews at Harvard Medical School. There weren't many women in the classes then. And also, I don't know what they thought of a skater or someone who had been traveling along. Maybe they thought it was all just fun and I couldn't settle down. I did start medical school as well. September 1st came, and all of a sudden there I was with everyone else. There were 135 or 40 of us in the class, and 5 of us were women. And everything was new. I had taken everything but science. Of course, I'd taken the pre-medical school requirements, but I thought, if I'm going to be studying medicine, I'd better learn everything I can about other things first. So when I started medical school, I found myself in the midst of top people from all over the country who had concentrated in all aspects of science. Some of my classmates had taught comparative anatomy. Some of them had done a number of other things before they even started medical school. So once again, I felt like a real beginner. And I'll never forget those first few months. I read all of the references listed on the back of our outline that had to do with human diseases, and suddenly realized that was supposed to be dessert. I was supposed to be paying attention to all of those dry, uninteresting things that we were supposed to study in those first few months. It was a whole new world, a world I loved, but I found myself very anxious to get to working with patients, and it took me a while to understand that we weren't going to just start right in there. So it was quite a shock, and exciting and a challenge again. But as we all know, there are hard knocks in all of those challenges, and it's not only always bruises from falling down on the ice. I can remember very clearly, after having heard for months and actually years, that, I don't know about girls going to medical school and taking a place from some deserving man in medical school. And I can remember after our first exams that first fall thinking, where is that person whose place I'm taking? And does he want it now? But those were very fleeting thoughts. I can remember sitting with about 6 of my classmates, 6 of the young men at lunch at one time, and I said, oh my gosh, I've just gotten a pink slip on our quiz. What am I going to do? And they commiserated with me, and it wasn't until a year later that I found out that 3 others at that same table had gotten those pink slips too. In surgery, we have something we call surgical conscience. And what that is that not only must you anticipate and be prepared and prepare the patient, prepare your operating team when you're going to do surgery, and be ready for whatever you may find, but also only you know if you've done everything you can, if you've taken everything out of yourself to make it as successful as it possibly can, and if you have been creative and you have prepared yourself the best you can in every way, done everything you can for the comfort, the recovery, the cure of the patient. And you have to look to yourself and say, I know. And that's a tremendous satisfaction. And no words of congratulation or praise can ever match that feeling when you know you've been able to do something for an individual that will add to their life, the comfort for their life, or even in a small, small way, make them more comfortable. The surgical mind may not have a very carefully prescribed or described definition, but I think there really is one. Part of it is a mind which involves feeling, I need to address this now. Ultimately, the decision is mine. I can't not make it. I must make it the very, very best I can, and it's up to me to see that I do. Oftentimes, people think that surgeons are cold, that they don't talk to patients. I'm always shocked when I hear that. I can remember one night on the emergency ward when the ambulance came and we didn't know what we were going to see when the doors of the ambulance opened to the emergency room. But what we did see was a very beautiful 16-year-old girl who had been in a horrible automobile accident. And she was unconscious, bones were sticking out of both legs, the scalp flap was off, and blood all over, and she was in shock. And obviously, there wasn't any time to say, what shall I do first? Immediately, you just have to put things in motion and handle things, the most acute first, to be sure she was breathing, stop the bleeding, get intravenous in, get the blood pressure back, then splint her legs and so on. And as I was doing that and working on her, and then finally found we got her blood pressure back on her, I was told that her parents had come, and could I come out and speak to them? And when I saw that she was stable enough for me to turn away from the stretcher momentarily, I did, to go and speak to her parents. And as I did, I suddenly felt overwhelmed with my stomach flipped, I felt nauseated, I felt weak. because of the horror of what I had just seen and had to take care of. But I couldn't let myself feel that way until it was all right to. And that's part of the surgical mind too, addressing what you need to and you know you can do, and postponing how you feel about it, thinking only of the patient and what you need to do when you have to. There's a really interesting balance, because sometimes when we're intensely concentrating, we also need to have our other antennae out, awareness. Maybe what we're talking about is focus. Training ourselves to be able to focus on what we need to. And sometimes that seems as if we're blocking out other things. But there's still an awareness of them. I don't know how really to explain that, but certainly you do that in taking off on a double axle. You have to concentrate on what you're doing, but obviously if somebody's coming down the ice about to bump into you, you've got to be aware of that, but not so much that you don't think of exactly what you're doing, or you'll fall flat on the jump itself. In surgery, you have to think of exactly what you're doing when the scalpel is in your hand and your focus is exactly on what it is you're doing. I mean, if you aren't concentrating, then and you're not placing that tiny incision in just the proper point in the common duct, you could be in real trouble, and the patient too. And you can't allow yourself not to concentrate. But you also have to be aware so that if something is happening in any other part of the operating field, you sense that too, because you mustn't ignore that while you're concentrating on this thing. It's a very, very interesting balance of concentrating and awareness. And our minds are capable of phenomenal things. And perhaps that's something we should study more and find out about more. Most great people, athletes, scientists, Nobel Prize winners, movie producers, know that they've had to concentrate but allow their minds to think in many areas at once. If they didn't, while they're working to solve something, they wouldn't be able to think of alternative solutions. It's exciting. I think I'd like to talk about the range in medicine. If you've ever thought about considering medicine as an interest you'd like to pursue for the rest of your life, I'd like to encourage you. Perhaps it's just my own point of view, but I can't imagine any other field that has as many different areas within it. There are so many things in medicine. Right now, of course, there are tremendous biotechnology advances. There are advances over when I went to medical school of the micro amounts of substances in the system that can be measured. Thinking of 50,000 times of magnifying something, thinking of splicing a gene. It's remarkable, the different areas. We all think of the satisfaction, it's very, very real, and it's there, of being able to help another human being in a large way or a small way, in dealing with family problems, in healing from a wound or from surgery, or recovering from an illness, and smoothing that for them. That's a tremendous satisfaction. But there are so many different areas. If you think you're interested in what makes human beings tick, or how bodies work, or what that amazing thing is of what's telling us to breathe. I'm not having to tell my heart to pump right now. And the heart doesn't get tired. It rests between beats. We don't have to think of things like, can you swallow standing on your head? Can you drink a glass of water when you stand on your head? You can. Do you swallow up or swallow down? Can you swallow against gravity? You can. We don't stop to think about the amazing parts of the human body or of the human mind. If anything about life interests you, if you think you're interested in medicine, go ahead and explore it. You can be in any aspect of it at all, and there are tremendous ones. That's my own point of view, but I'm sure some of you will share it. If you look at people who have had an interest, whether it's collecting insects or it's doing a sport growing up, very often you find they don't just stop an interest there. They've developed a capacity to be deeply involved with something, to carry it through, to try their hardest at it, and to accept the challenge of doing it the best they can. I think when someone has started to work on something, it's more unusual if they've been successful. For instance, an athlete, a top athlete, I think it makes more sense to me that of course they should go on and apply the same things they used in their athletics to something else. And I think it's a waste if they don't. There are lots of people who have been football heroes, basketball heroes, who've gone on and given of themselves. Look at Mickey King. She was the first woman diving coach at the Air Force Academy. She was very involved in encouraging the young Olympic hopefuls after she won her own gold medal. And there are all sorts of people who've done it. There was once, and I wish I could remember where I read it, but I read a study that was done about figure skating champions who went on into medicine. And there are a number. David Jenkins, who was Olympic champion, is a gastroenterologist. And Misha Petkovic, who was our national champion, went on to be a Rhodes Scholar. I do think that what you learn from applying yourself to a sport and really applying yourself will hold in good stead for whatever you do. So go ahead and have fun with your sport. Don't worry about whether you've decided exactly what you want to do for your so-called career. I don't think we've followed people long enough yet to see if the ones in the last 5 or 10 years who have succeeded and excelled in their sport are going to apply that to their next career. We should follow them. We should watch them. I think they will. After all, do we know how many of the musical hits right now are going to last 20 years? Some of the old-timers that we now hear all the time are the ones that were so good they did last. Are we sure which ones those are yet? Not quite. I bet if we keep track, we'll find that the athletes in the Olympics, the Winter Games coming up this next year, in World Championships in every sport, taekwondo to table tennis, to every sport we can think of, will take what they've learned through their sport and apply it some way if you really look. Even if it's applying it to how they compete with each other in business or anything else they do. That's a tough thing. We're told that we should get in there and compete and try to beat our competitors. That's a very tough thing to deal with. After all, very often they're our friends. And why should we want to beat them? That's not the point. If you look back and think of anything, any race you've been in or anything else, stop and think, were you trying to beat that other runner only, or were you really trying to see what you could do and beat your own time and see how good you were, and perhaps use the other runners to measure yourself? I think that's the way it is, and that's the way I had to look at it, because it was against my philosophy to get out on the ice to see if I could beat anybody. In fact, I remember clearly one time winning a competition when I didn't really feel I had skated my personal best. It was an awful feeling, and I realized at that time that what I needed was to feel that I prepared as well as I could for the competition, although I never felt totally prepared even 5 seconds before it. I always felt I needed to do more until I actually got out on the ice at that competition. But for me, it was seeing what I could do compared to what I had done, or what I had in my mind that I should be able to do, that counted for me. I have 3 daughters. They still come and skate on the outdoor ponds with me. They've all skated. I found that putting skates on them when they were really little slowed them down. If I was over at the rink and they were on the ice too, made it an awful lot easier to keep track of them. They all skated. They all had fun with it. One of them in particular, they all took part in a few of the little competitions or the ice shows when they could put on all sorts of makeup and skate in the ice shows with their friends when they were really little. One of them went on to compete in local competitions and is on her 8th or gold figure skating test. And it's been fun for me to see that they enjoyed skating, but I don't think that it should be a need from us that our children do the same sport. One of them happens to be good in many sports, and I sometimes think, oh, they come too easily to her. They were never all that easy for me. But each different individual finds his or her own different path. And as a mother, I feel it's for me to encourage whatever that path is. And lots of times it's been interesting to me when it's something I couldn't do. I've been very motivated during my years in surgery to find out some way so that after I've operated on a patient for cancer, I could say, I know I've removed all the cancer. Or else be honest with them and be able to say, I know that there's some left even if we can't see it, therefore you should have a certain kind of treatment. There hasn't been a clear scientific way to know that. And I was very excited when I first heard Eric Fossel, who was trained in chemistry and biochemistry and biophysics, present his work on detecting malignancy, the presence of malignancy, simply by looking at blood plasma. And I started working with him, began to think immediately when I heard him speak of the clinical applications and the things that it could help if we could say, yes, there's cancer, no, there isn't. If someone came with symptoms or tumors or lumps and say, well, now, what do we do? Does the patient have to, or this healthy feeling person have to be put through all sorts of invasive studies? Or is there some way that we can treat them another way? Now, for the first time, it is possible, and I hesitate when I say this because it's on an investigational basis right now, but to look at the plasma and directly measure a change that normally happens in the body when the body fights itself, fights the presence of any cancer cells. And that's something that, from seeing the needs for my own patients in my own practice of surgery, has motivated me to work on getting that clinically applied. And in the same area, this same technology has taken me into the cardiology area of looking at the fractions of cholesterol, the LDL, HDL, VLDL, chylomicrons, and measure them directly. So interestingly enough, some of the technology that we didn't have when was in medical school, I'm now getting involved with and actually doing research with my own professor of physiology who taught me when I was in medical school, and with a professor of medicine who taught me when I was in medical school. Now I'm involved in basic research, working on some similar things and connecting with them once again as we try to make this available to physicians. And it sort of is one more example of the number of areas there are within medicine and the number of things that you may end up doing that you never thought you would. But the interests that you have and the things that you work hard on as a teenager can take you into all sorts of different directions. And when you're interested in things and you want to find out about them and you have the curiosity and you're motivated to make a difference, you can. And who knows where it will take you. And it's been exciting for me to find where my interests take me and are still taking me. It's been astounding to see at the American Academy of Achievement the opportunities that are created. When you stop and think, the greats who are honored at these things, the Nobel Prize winners meeting each other, the people in different fields, the musicians meeting people in the fields of science, the artists, the historians, the poets. It's wonderful to see all these people coming together and have a chance to talk about common threads, and there are a lot of them. A lot of them have to do with visions and dreams, and daring to dream. And again, we keep on seeing examples of there isn't one person in the whole Academy of Achievement who has ever escaped hard knocks, failures. No one likes to call them failures. Maybe they say they're things that don't go quite the way they expected, but that's what makes the stories. And every one of us has them. Every one of you with your dreams can expect to have the highs and the lows, but figure skating is a very good example. When you fall flat, when you so-called wipe out, when you go flat on your face sliding across the ice, there's only one thing to do, and that is get up and try it again. And wow, when you've been flat on your face sliding across the ice, it feels so good when you finally get to the point where you can perfect that thing and land that jump and not be flat on the ice. And I guess it's much better feeling because you know what it's like the other way. And anyone who's won anything knows what it's like not to win. And I remember the day when I kept on hearing, well, someone has to lose. And it occurred to me, someone has to win too. So you might as well give it a good hard try.